This is Bob Oliphant from the Westford Historical Society and Museum, bringing you episode 48 of season 4 of the Westford Wardsman podcast. The Westford Wardsman newspaper was part of Turner's Public Spirit, a weekly newspaper in Ayer a century ago. In this episode, we'll be reading the Wardsman for the week ending Saturday, December 2nd, 1911, and I'll elaborate on what was happening in Westford that week. The week starts with the Westford Center section. William Howard of Lunenburg has been a recent visitor at the home of his brother, Calvin Howard. The latter has had a long, tedious time of many weeks of pain and inconvenience, the result of his accident, the injured knee still requiring medical as well as surgical attention. I believe Calvin Howard lived on Howard Road, and it was his family that the road was named after. Visitors at the Congregational Parsonage last Sunday, coming up from Cambridge by automobile, were Mr. and Mrs. Charles Bonney, Mrs. Young and daughter, Miss Caroline Young, and Paul Danners, a student at Harvard. The entire party attended the morning church service. Mr. Bonney is a well-known Boston merchant, and Mrs. Bonney will be pleasantly remembered as one of the speakers at the Tadmont Club last season, when she gave greetings from the Cantabringia Club of Cambridge, of which she was president. Miss Amelia Lambert, who recently went to Greensburg, Pennsylvania, to accept a position as dietitian in Westmoreland Hospital, writes to the home friends of being pleasantly located and liking her new surroundings. Miss Carrie E. and Florence H. Reed of Barry, who have recently bought a pleasant home for themselves there, were at home to their friends on Thanksgiving evening. The event proved a very pleasant one, and their many Westford friends wish they might have been among those present to extend good wishes and greetings. Oscar Spaulding and John Fletcher are among the recent ones to equip their buildings with electric lighting. Mrs. John B. Fletcher, is quite seriously ill at her home with heart trouble. Dr. Wells has a trained nurse in attendance, and Miss Chandler is at home with her aunt. Mr. and Mrs. Sebastian Watson went this week to New Bern, North Carolina, to spend the winter. Mrs. Edmund Day will spend the winter with Westford and Groton relatives. School closed Wednesday afternoon for the Thanksgiving recess, lasting until Monday morning. At the Congregational Church last Sunday morning, Reverend David Wallace preached most ably, drawing lessons from the closing events in the life of Joseph, his subject being, quote, growing old gracefully, end quote, portraying the ideal old age of great memories and glorious visions. In the evening, he gave echoes from the Ford Hall meetings in Boston, Reverend R.J. Campbell's address of London, to which he recently listened. A Thanksgiving week wedding of much interest is that of Will E. Wright and Miss Ruby Carter on December 1st, 1911. To further particulars next week. Mr. and Mrs. George Good, who, after closing camp at Ford's Pond, spent the later autumn weeks in Lowell, left there recently for their annual sojourn in New York. Thanksgiving week visitors at the parsonage have been Miss Gertrude Hazen of Hartford, Vermont, and Mrs. Alice Martin of Lebanon, New Hampshire. Wright and Fletcher, now the Muffins on Main building, have been painting the ceiling in their store, giving it a very light and clean appearance, especially at night when the electric lights are turned on. A large group of the members of the Tadmont Club, about 20 in all, enjoyed the hospitality of the neighboring meeting of the Littleton Women's Club at Littleton on Monday afternoon. The good weather, the pleasant welcome, and good entertainment made it a very enjoyable occasion. Miss Sarah Loker, president of the Home Club, represented her members most capably in the afternoon's program with a review of one of E.S. Benson's, the well-known English author's books, The Silent Isle, given with entertaining discernment. The English author referred to here seems to be Edward Frederick Benson, born in 1867, who died in 1940, who wrote professionally as E.F. Benson. However, The Silent Isle, a collection of autobiographical essays published in 1904, was written by his brother, Arthur Christopher Benson. They were sons of Edward White Benson, 1829 to 1896, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury in England from 1882 to 1896. George Albert Drew, with characteristic initiative and enterprise, is having a road built from the Drew home place through some of the Providence Swamp, coming out on Providence Road. This enterprise is to facilitate getting back and forth from the Drew farm, which is the farm that most of us remember just off of 495 heading up the hill on Boston Road, and the large Reed Farm, which Mr. Drew recently required, which was located out Main Street past the cemetery. And I think the Providence Road end of this road that is described here, going from the Drew farm on Boston Road over to Providence Road, is now called Drew Crossing and has several houses on it. The next section is called Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving Day, the homiest holiday of the year, the festival of the fireside, has come and gone. While apparently a quiet day in our village, there were many pleasant gatherings, while others went to gather around festive boards in other places. At Mrs. Alvin Fisher's, a large family group were present. H.L. Wright entertained the Henry M. Wrights of Quincy. At H.V. Hildreth's were present Mr. and Mrs. Fred Hildreth, Mrs. Kate Allen, and daughter Miss Catherine of Malden. Harold Hildreth was also home for the day. Guests at Leonard Wheeler's were Mrs. Clara Russell, Mr. and Mrs. Willard Pratt, and 2 children, all of Lowell. The John P. Wrights entertained in their new home a friend, Miss Wakefield of Lowell. At Mrs. Frances Prescott's, Mr. and Mrs. Oscar Spaulding were guests for the day. The Alonzo Sutherlands entertained Mr. and Mrs. George Cameron and Bertram Cass of Somerville. Guests at Miss Ella Hildreth's were Mr. and Mrs. Willis Hildreth. Mr. and Mrs. Charles Hildreth spent the day at George Haywood's. The family gathering at George T. Day's consisted of Mr. and Mrs. Daly, Mr. and Mrs. Sherman Fletcher, and Miss Emily Fletcher. Dr. and Mrs. Wells entertained Mr. and Mrs. Herman Wells and sons, Irving and Clayton, and Mrs. S.A. Hills and Miss Hannah Morrill of Amesbury. James Kimball spent the day at the Luce homestead. At John M. Fletcher's were Mr. and Mrs. John Wilson of Chelmsford and Mr. and Mrs. J. Herbert Fletcher and son John. Mr. and Mrs. Naylor were at the Congregational Parsonage. The Edward Fishers went to spend the day with Swampscott relatives, and the Houghton G. Osgood family with Cambridge relatives. That brings us to the About Town section. At a meeting of the Unitarian Church last Thursday evening to consider the question of pulpit supply, it was voted unanimously to invite Reverend Mr. Weeks to supply the pulpit for 6 months. He has been a preacher in the Methodist Church for 20 years and is able, eloquent, and logical. The Society is fortunate in securing his leadership, he having declined several flattering calls elsewhere. This was Reverend Lyman B. Weeks, and he would serve as the pastor of the First Parish Unitarian Church from 1911 to 1914, when he moved to West Somerville, Mass. He had served 25 years as a Methodist minister in the Wyoming Conference in New York State before becoming a Universalist minister in 1905. Charles Whitney has been ill at his home on the Lowell Road, but is now able to be out in his usual dooryard review of farm work. James O'Brien on Pigeon Hill has sold his apples to Stiles of Littleton. As soon as the apples are delivered and the cellar is clear, he will commence at once installing steam heat for his dwelling house under the direction of Augustus Whidden. Miss Ella Wright of Cleveland, Ohio, has completed the construction of another new fancy-built wall nearly opposite her summer home on the Lowell Road at Brookside. She owned the old Richardson house at 120 Lowell Road and spent her summers in Westford, although she lived in Cleveland. The Fortnightly Club is on its feet and doing business at the old stand at the Wright Schoolhouse on the Groton Road. When the old West Chelmsford Debating Society gets harnessed into its old-time record for discussion, these two literary organizations may tilt it a little along reciprocity lines. The WCTU, that's the Women's Christian Temperance Union, sent a Thanksgiving box to the WCTU home in Boston to be distributed among the poor. Mrs. McMaster had charge of collecting and sending. Mrs. Sidney Whitney, who has been ill for a long time, is gradually falling, and it being an incurable case. Seth Bannister is home from Amherst Agricultural College, now UMass Amherst, for the Thanksgiving holidays. Alistair McDougall is also home from his junior year at Amherst and will remain while Thanksgiving turkey keeps up its temptations. Next, we have the Forge Village section. Cameron School closed on Wednesday afternoon for the Thanksgiving holidays, reopening on Monday, December 4th. Reverend A.J. Bumpus will officiate at the services at St. Andrew's Mission on Sunday evening. The Abbott Worsted Company closed their mill on Thanksgiving Day. Operations were begun again on Friday morning. Mr. and Mrs. John Burnett spent the holiday as guests of Mr. and Mrs. Harold Hennessy of Lowell. A theater party is being formed in the village to witness the performance of Chanticleer at the Lowell Opera House next week. Chanticleer is a verse play in 4 acts written by Edmund Rostand, 1868 to 1919. The play is notable in that all the characters are farmyard animals, including the main protagonist, Chanticleer, a rooster. The play centers on the theme of idealism and spiritual sincerity as contrasted with cynicism and artificiality. Much of the play satirizes modernistic artistic doctrines from Rostand's romantic perspective. You can read more about it at the Chanticleer Play Wikipedia article. Many from this village attended the sacred concert held in North Chelmsford last Sunday night. Mrs. Dinah Murray is now much improved from her illness at her home on Pleasant Street. The Girls Friendly Society held their regular meeting in Recreation Hall last Wednesday evening. The Ladies' Sewing Circle met in Recreation Hall on Wednesday afternoon. A dainty collation was served after the meeting. Recreation Hall was the meeting space in the St. Andrew's Mission, which is the building is still located just off of Pleasant Street in Forge Village, and it's distinguished by a St. Andrew's cross on one of the gables facing the road. That's the news in Westford for the week ending December 2nd, 1911. Thank you for listening, and thanks to Ryan Cousins of WestfordCAT for providing technical support. You can find transcriptions and podcasts from the Wardsman at our website at museum.westford.org or visit the Historical Society's Facebook page for more Westford news from days gone by. This is Bob Oliphant, and I hope you will join us for next week's Westford Wardsman podcast. Thank you.